Hi, I'm Yasmin, a wife and a proud new mom with a background in perinatal nursing. Welcome to Birth Unboxed, where we talk about all things birth, whether it's unassisted free birth, home birth with a midwife, or in a hospital. I believe every woman deserves the right to choose how and where she gives birth. I created this podcast to raise awareness so women can make informed choices and feel empowered in their births. By sharing stories and learning from one another, we can reclaim our power and become the ultimate authority in our own birthing experiences. Sisterhood is powerful, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to have this chat with you. How are you doing today?
I'm really good. I'm really grateful to be here. Really excited.
Awesome. So excited. So we've known each other for years and years, but I actually don't know much about your birth stories at all, or how all of your journey into motherhood, all of that has been. So Jennifer has four beautiful daughters, and there's quite an age gap between the first one and the last three. So I'm really interested to hear that story, how your journey into motherhood as a really young mom versus now, and how your view of birth and all of that has shifted, if it has shifted throughout the years. So give us a little introduction and then jump right in. I can't wait to hear it.
Okay, great. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to share my birth stories. When you first shared that you were doing this podcast, I had shared it on my stories, and with the sentiment that birth stories are medicine stories. And as I've gotten older, for me, it's always been really therapeutic every time I've had a chance to tell a story of my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been another perspective, another piece of wisdom, something somatically that has moved for me. So I just wanted to start with that I'm really grateful for
Yeah.
this opportunity to receive medicine and the opportunity to use my voice and to share and trust that it'll land as it needs to. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm Jennifer. I have four daughters. I am a wife, a mother, a homeschool mom primarily now, and recently a grandmother. My eldest just
Yes.
had recently her first daughter. Um, so yeah, my journey into motherhood was um, really fascinating and interesting, and very much in survival for my first
Mm-hmm.
birth. So I was 14 when I became pregnant and 15 when my daughter was born. And there was really, with the experience and the wisdom and the understanding that I have now, there was a disconnect between the somatic
Mm-hmm.
experience of being pregnant and sort of the survival function in the mind of like, this is something that I need to get through. So it
Of
was not
course.
a very embodied pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the
Yeah.
end of my pregnancy, I felt very connected with the baby. But there was a lot that was missing in terms of the connection to my body and what was happening in my body. Being so young,
Mm-hmm.
there was a
Of
lot of
course. Yeah.
instability on my outside world. So it was
Mm-hmm.
really a pregnancy of survival, like just trying to figure out like
Yeah.
how to get through day by day. And
Mm-hmm.
so my
Yeah.
birth was very much fearful. There was a lot of fear in my body. There
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of uncertainty in my body. There wasn't a lot of confidence or awareness on what my body was capable of. And also systemically, I was treated through by the medical system as not capable. There was a lot of
Yeah.
language that was used that really I held on to throughout my pregnancy, and specifically in labor and delivery, that my body was
Mm-hmm.
too small, I was too young, my yoni wasn't opening properly because I was still a baby, like I hadn't fully gone through puberty.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of imprints around not able, that my body was not able.
Right.
So entering into like onto the labor and delivery floor. I'll never forget this moment. I'm 15 years old. It's late at night. As soon as my labor started, there was a somatic connection that happened to me immediately that I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm about to bring this baby
Yeah.
into the world. Like it's things are getting very real now. Like to be a
Mm-hmm.
15-year-old and almost the benefit of being so young was that there was a lot of things that I wasn't quite fully grasping the weight of
Yeah.
motherhood. Where in my later pregnancies, those can kind of be more prevalent on what it
Mm-hmm.
actually means, you know? So that was a benefit, I would say, that I was very naive about the whole thing
Yeah.
until labor and delivery, until labor started. And it was just like
Yeah.
a switch went off. And I feel like for me, that's when I became a mother. That
Mm.
all of sort of the the impact of what was about to take place really came online for me. And
Mm-hmm.
that felt so overwhelming. It felt
Yeah.
like a ton
I
to be
bet. Well, even
15.
for a 30-year-old going into
Mhm.
labor for the first time, you don't really know what to expect. Like I read and listened to every podcast out there, and it was still like you have to experience it to really understand. And this is, with a fully developed brain and life experiences, so I can only imagine for someone who's 15 still trying to figure out who they are.
Yes.
It's must be so overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so divinely planned because it felt
Yeah.
like the mother that I was going to be really came online at that moment, like physiologically, that what
Yeah.
needed to happen for me to become a mother at 15 really happened and it clicked. So I always felt
Yeah.
like I had this experience of being a very young mother, but it just felt like something switched that my mothering
Yeah.
to the ability of a 15-year-old's mothering, but it
Yeah.
really came
Yeah.
online at that moment. So I remember
That's
getting off the
amazing. Yeah.
elevator and it was very late and the hospital was quiet and I'm in a wheelchair. Like the whole thing was very sort of like
Yeah.
victim mentality. Like this poor
Yeah.
thing is about to have a baby, wheel her in her wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
And as the elevator doors open, I can hear other women in like the depths of birthing and I was
Mm-hmm.
terrified. I was so scared.
Yeah.
I felt like everything in my body just contracted. Like I felt so alone and so scared and so not capable, sitting in this wheelchair, like very disembodied. And that was sort of the
Mm-hmm.
theme of my labor with Bianca, with my first, was that it was very,
Mm-hmm.
very victimy. Like the birth was happening to me, that I didn't feel very empowered. I wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
I was given
Mm-hmm.
something, some sort of medication immediately, like off the elevator. Someone gave me an injection in my hip for pain. And, 34 years later, I can't
Wow.
tell you what it was.
Yeah.
And then the interventions they just kept coming. And I didn't feel that I questioned any of it. So I had an
Mm-hmm.
epidural, and then we went through sort of the cascade of like, well, the baby's heart rate is fluctuating, and the labor isn't progressing, and we're gonna try and speed things up. And then some other interventions happened, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually, for my delivery, and so beautiful to like be brought back into this moment. But
Yeah.
there was my OBGYN at the foot, and they had brought in
Mm-hmm.
another doctor to try and help me push the baby out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also had an epidural, so I wasn't in my body at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Imagining, like trying to imagine what the sensation was to push, but not being able to like
Mm-hmm.
somatically
Yeah.
experience the sensation of pushing. And so they had
Mm-hmm.
this little doctor, very short man, hop up on a stool beside me and physically bear down
Uh,
on my belly as I was pushing.
wow.
Um, and so yeah, it was quite an intense experience
Yeah.
and ended up getting an episiotomy and which was
Oh.
quite traumatic for me because my
Yeah.
doctor at the time had said, "Well, look at her, she's just a baby." This body isn't ready to
Mm.
birth. And then I could hear them do the episiotomy.
Ugh.
And a few moments later, Bianca was here, and then began sort of the reality of life on the outside with her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the entire experience was very fear-based and very much in a
Yeah.
victim consciousness for me the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
Not very empowered, um, not very in my body, not very aware. I didn't have a lot of awareness of what options
Mm-hmm.
might have been available for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the combination of just my age, the time in my life, being really alone in my pregnancy and specifically in labor and delivery, um, led for this sort of cocktail of birth experience the first time around. So that was
Mm-hmm.
34 years ago. And a big part of my
Yeah.
personal journey as a woman and a mother has been a lot of deep somatic practices. So, doing a lot of trauma work, doing yoga and meditation practice, different sort of experiences that have led me deeper inside of my body and
Mm-hmm.
realizing the power of the mind and also the power of the body to hold experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
when we got pregnant for my twins, fast forward 21 years later, fast forward 20 some odd years later, and I'm married and have done a lot of practices around exploring my inner landscape and starting
Mm-hmm.
to get familiar with, first of all, feeling my feelings, feeling my body, somatically living in a more somatic way,
Mm-hmm.
understanding how my body, has held on to events and stories, and doing a lot of sort of inner work around feeling things that are left to be felt and integrating them and being able to move them through the body. So when I found myself pregnant with twins, there was this really good intersection of this new version of myself that was becoming, and still a lot of stories of birth trauma and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fear that was living in my body. So, because I wasn't a geriatric pregnancy at this point,
Of course. Yeah.
I
We
was
all are
moved.
now.
Yeah, yeah, I was moved along. So out of the doctor that I had known that delivered Bianca, that was still my OBGYN, um, into like a high risk clinic. We were treated really differently. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was this woman who was practicing sort of like yoga and meditation and somatic practices. And so I had started practicing hypnobirth. And I still was really kind of holding on to this idea that I could have, even though I was high risk and I was geriatric and all of this sort
Yeah.
of like labeling, I
Yeah.
was really kind of resisting that. But then it was still, how much resistance am I going to allow? And then how much is there still this sort of story of fear in my body about what might go wrong, especially because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
geriatric mom and I have twins, and they shared a placenta. Like, there were so many things that
Mm-hmm.
were being given to me as something to be afraid of, and hold on to that fear, or something to just accept as a natural physiological part of birth. So that was a pretty good intersection for me on how
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
experienced my twin pregnancy, was this sort of dance between ideas of sovereignty, ideas of birth being just a natural, physiological, spontaneous event. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really need
Yeah.
interventions. And then still this idea of like, oh, but,
Yeah.
and still in the system, I
Yeah.
would say, also because I was
Mm-hmm.
um, in a high risk clinic and doing like
Of
double
course.
appointments
Yeah.
and all of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really beautiful experience of what I now understand as this evolution of myself as woman and mother, this evolution of myself as understanding my inner landscape and having birth be such a teacher, Pregnancy
Yeah.
and birth being such a teacher for me on trusting my body, being aware of stories and programs as they come up, and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily pushing them away or discrediting them, but how can I really allow space for these experiences to come up?
Mm-hmm.
My twin pregnancy was when I really deepened into my meditation practice. Um, because at the beginning of the pregnancy, we had just suffered a loss,
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
um, the symptoms of the pregnancy loss appeared really quickly in this what is now the pregnancy for our twins. And at that time, what really came through for me was this idea of, in this moment, I'm pregnant. There's life within me in this moment. And can I really surrender into this moment and not allow myself to be pulled into the future? And so meditation was the way that I was really able to do that. And so I would sit every day, I would find a
Mm-hmm.
tiny corner where the light of the outside would shine inside, and I would sit there and I would get really still, and I would feel my body, and I would imagine the babies, and I would cover them in like a little golden shield, and I would just be super present. And so that
Yeah.
really led me to be able to, because there were, if I don't think if I would have had that practice, would I have been able to navigate all of sort of the roller coasters of, I was
Mm-hmm.
bleeding for the first 3 months and they weren't sure if the pregnancy
Mm.
was going to take. And um, anxiety can be like a really strong thing that
Yes.
comes online during pregnancy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was a really beautiful gift for me, which ended up like filtering over into how I now experience life, is this idea of
Yeah.
like,
That's
how can I
beautiful.
be in my
Yeah.
body and really be present with what I'm feeling and be fully in the now. And,
Mm-hmm.
as my kids are like navigating life, and you can kind of get caught up in like, well, what about, am I making the right decision? And what about their future? What about this? What about that? And just kind of like taking a pause and like coming inside and saying, well, right now, how can I be fully in the right now and never mind all of the outside stuff? So that was a
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful chapter for me that began that chapter in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of played a little bit in both worlds, in like the sovereign birth world. Like I had a doula and I was practicing hypnobirth, but then we were still really in the system. And so in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, I thought I was going to have a sovereign hospital birth.
Yeah.
A sovereign twin hospital birth,
Yeah.
which didn't turn out like that. Um, but was also beautiful, beautiful medicine to kind of like really like what I've known and what I've now experienced is that my births, having a birth at 15 and having a birth at 41, they've really been beautiful benchmarks of who I am as a woman at that time. And there's
Yeah.
no right or wrong, or I wish, like it just is a beautiful snapshot of who I am as a
Mm-hmm.
woman and mother. And in this like majestic experience of bringing life, um, my births have really kind of captured where I am
Yeah.
on my journey as a
Yeah,
woman.
birth can really do that, and especially having like that gap, you could really pinpoint where you're at in life when those
Yeah.
moments come up again. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. So for the twins, we were progressing really well, all things considered. And also kind of being given this story that, you're not going to carry full term, they're going to come early, twins have high complications, like all of this sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of felt like during my pregnancy with the twins, I was very in my body and I felt very connected to the babies. And so I had this experience of being really here, and then out here felt like a very different
Mm-hmm.
experience. So I was sort of like dancing
Yeah.
between these two worlds of
Mm-hmm.
um, be my inner world feeling so good. And I had such a beautiful pregnancy with the twins, and this kind of like impending doom
Yeah.
that was going to
It can be
happen.
quite the
Like,
dance because the
yeah.
noise can be so loud, especially when it's twins, especially when it's a geriatric pregnancy, especially there's all these possible complications and there's so much fear and the noise can be really loud. So I can imagine because you were able to really tune in that you were really doing this dance between your inner self and the outside noise. It was quite the dance, wasn't it?
Yes, it really was. And hypnobirthing actually was a really beautiful tool during my twin pregnancy because it really did a lot of work for me in terms
Mm.
of identifying the sensations of fear in the body and really being present with it. Like
Mm-hmm.
identifying what is an actual story and also sort of reclassifying sensations in the body. Like, can we feel them without the filter of past stories, past experiences, past traumatic events, even stuff that isn't even ours, like the way that our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts have spoken to us about their births
Mm-hmm.
and have
Yeah.
described their sensations of contraction or pushing or delivery or like the language that we've been given around these sensations in our body and what they actually mean. So hypnobirthing for me was such a powerful practice of reframing the messages of the sensations of birth and
Yeah.
delivery. So that was a really beautiful tool. And then I went in for like a 34-week, 33-week checkup. And they're like, well, your blood pressure's through the roof. You have
Mm.
preeclampsia. We're going to need to get these babies out. And so everything just went sideways.
Uh.
And I had still thought that even though they were going to induce me, I packed my essential oils. I called my doula. We had put signs up. I laugh about it now, but it really was like the intersection of these two versions of
Yeah.
myself. So we had put signs up on our labor room in the hospital saying hypnobirthing in process, do not disturb. So we really wanted to try and keep
Yeah.
the noise
Yeah.
out and really kind of be
Yeah.
with the process. And it did
Well,
not
I'm glad you
go at
tried.
all.
Did
It
it
was
work?
a valiant effort.
Yeah.
My poor
It
husband
doesn't
was
always work in the hospital.
no, it didn't at all, especially because they had given me Pitocin. They were trying to get the
Ah.
babies out. And so I felt like at the beginning, I felt like, okay, I got this. Like I've been doing my breathing. I'm like deep in my meditation practice. I'm
Yeah.
practicing hypnobirthing. Um, and then no, it was really like side railed,
Yeah.
big time, big time. So it was a really like I'm laughing about it because it was a really and also I could take the perspective of like I failed. I had practiced all
Mm-hmm.
of these somatic practices. I had
Yeah.
practiced my meditation. I was with my doula and trying to have this like very intervention free
Mm-hmm.
medicalized birth, which doesn't
Yeah.
really flow so well. So yeah, and in the end I ended up having a vaginal delivery, which felt like a huge success for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My preeclampsia was like a thing postpartum. So I was in the hospital for a while, but the babies were also in the NICU. So that worked really well
Ah.
because I didn't feel separated postpartum from them, which I was really worried
Mm-hmm.
about having babies in the NICU. Like I didn't want to leave, which there were a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
other moms at that time that were discharged and having to come back and
Yeah.
forth with like such a
Yeah.
beautiful time. So that felt like a
Mm-hmm.
really big win. And we were only in the hospital for I think it was like 2 weeks with the kids. So in the
And you
end,
were able to stay admitted those 2 weeks?
so I kind of finagled my way a bit because I had the blood pressure issue and I kind of
Right.
like got lost in the system a little bit because I was on a different floor and the girls were in the NICU. I kept getting
Gotcha.
checked by nurses and they kept being like, "What are you doing here? Oh my gosh, your blood pressure is really high. You need to stay here." So it was kind of this like it worked really
I
well because I
see.
didn't want to go
Yeah,
home.
yeah.
And then in the
Yeah.
end, there was like a staffing room up way somewhere high at Mount Sinai. It literally was like a utility closet that they had put a bed in for nurses to rest, and they let me stay
Oh
there
yeah.
for 2 nights because I just
No
didn't want to
way.
leave. I was literally in a closet in the hospital being like, I can't leave my
That's
baby.
hilarious.
So I stayed there, and
Uh,
then they ended up transferring to St. Joe's, which was literally down the street from where we lived. So my husband
mm,
and I were able to be there from the first feed at 5:30 in the morning, and we'd stay until midnight. We'd go home, we'd sleep, and we'd come back. Um,
yeah.
and that was really nice. It also felt kind of like a blessing that we had a little bit of a gap between the huge event of the birth and then the
Uh-huh.
NICU and all of sort of the fear that comes up with that as well, and then bringing them home. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a little bit of
Yeah.
like a shoulder that for us felt really nurturing and really supportive.
Yeah. Okay.
St. Joe's actually
Yeah.
had like a graduating room. So for the night
Uh,
before we took the kids home, they had my husband and I
yeah.
stay and the babies stay in the room with us so that they could kind of make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we were all doing okay
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that felt really, really nice. And then we
Yeah.
put them in their car seats and we just walked home. So it was really
Yeah.
kind of like our exit out of the system felt aligned with sort of who we were as
Mm-hmm.
parents and our values around or what we were trying to accomplish. So it
Yeah.
happened exactly in sort of the soup of who we were
Yeah.
and what we needed.
How many weeks were you when you were induced?
34.
34. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 34 and days. But
Yeah.
in twin language, we were good. Like one of the
Mm-hmm.
girls was 4 pounds and a bit, and the other one was over 6 pounds. So
Oh
they were
wow.
all,
Nice.
yeah, they were
Yeah.
both
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
great. They did great. Yeah, and they're great
Mm-hmm.
now. Yeah, so that was the twins. It feels like that was certainly the theme for the twins, was this like
Yeah.
intersection of starting to feel kind of pulled out of the system and then still very much dancing. And then when the
Mm-hmm.
twins were a year old, we were pregnant for our fourth and final baby. So I was 41 at that point. 41,
Mm-hmm.
40 turning 41. So I've gone from like the youngest mom
Yeah.
to one of the oldest moms.
Yeah.
And with my pregnancy with Francesca, my youngest, it was just like I'm sharing like the culmination of who I am as woman.
Mm-hmm.
And at that
Yeah.
point in my life, I was very deep in my somatic work. I was very deep in my spiritual practices, very deep in my yoga and my meditation practices, really in my body, really loving and celebrating my body, like starting to visit the ways in which, for me, the disassociation in my body had led to a lack of love and honor and appreciation of my body. So that kind of work
Mm.
was happening a lot for me. And so to find myself pregnant at 40 was just glorious. It was
Yeah.
just the most beautiful pregnancy. I felt the entire time in deep communication with her. Like we just felt like it was just this symbiotic relationship of
Mm-hmm.
growth and communication. So from Frankie's birth, from Frankie's pregnancy, I was really choosing to be like, no more medicalized system. I got a midwife. I was considering a home birth. Um, really felt empowered and able
Yeah. Yeah.
to be in that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a midwife and a very low intervention, like any opportunity for some sort of intervention I had opted out of. I really felt very sovereign in my pregnancy. Like I
Mm-hmm.
kind of felt like I didn't even really need my midwife.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so zero complications. and also in the midwife community, the midwives that I experienced sort of like laughed at the idea of geriatric pregnancy. Like they were just
Yeah.
treating me as an individual
Yeah.
creating life, moving through pregnancy. So
Mhm.
it felt very different. Like a lot of the language
Yeah.
that I had heard and received and imprints with the twins, it wasn't even part
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
that
it can be
felt,
quite different.
yeah, it felt really good. It felt
Mhm.
really good for me. So really uneventful. Like I felt the
Yeah.
twins were growing. I was able to kind of rest-ish, like certainly not rest like
Yeah,
in the
how
womb.
was that? Having
No.
twins, like they were 1 year old.
Yeah,
So
not
how
at
was
all.
like
Not at all like it was for the twins. Like I
Yeah.
slept probably for 4 months with the twins and had the luxury and the time to just be like, I'm tired.
Right.
I'm gonna sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
With toddlers, it was not the same.
Yeah.
Um, so, sneaking in naps when you can and
Yeah.
certainly like early bedtimes, but I was still in a pretty like active phase of my life too. Like I was still teaching fitness classes, like I was still in the gym all
Wow.
the time.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it kept me going. It kept me feeling good. I think I
Mhm.
taught my last spinning class with Frankie at like 38 weeks or something. Like
Wow.
it's just, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
It was a really beautiful pregnancy. And I think
Wow.
because I
Yeah.
had the awareness that this was going to be my last pregnancy, I'm
Mhm.
really approaching it with a consciousness of just super gratitude, super presence, really trying to drink in the whole experience.
Yeah, just savoring it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I always say, like, this is my grand finale. Like, this is it for me. I know that I'm not going to be moving through this experience again and so that also had held
Mhm.
some bittersweetness too, because
Yeah.
I love being a mom. I love being pregnant. I love the time of pregnancy. I love the birth experience. Like there's just something for me that I know in my body I came here to mother. And so knowing that that was going to be the last chapter for me,
Yeah.
there was a lot of sadness too about it. And I was able to be with the experience of really savoring it and really knowing
Mhm.
like what a blessing to be able to
Yeah.
create life and to bring life earthside and to
Mhm.
be in the whole experience of, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. My twins aren't sleeping. Like I'm pregnant. I just want a nap. The whole thing, the beauty and
Yeah.
the mess of it, really being very grateful for it. And so Frankie's birth, we ended up birthing her at the Toronto Birth Center. At the time,
Mhm.
I really wanted a home birth. And I think I still had a little bit of resistance, feeling like I wasn't be able to drop in fully, knowing that the twins were around.
Yeah.
And so the birth center was this really beautiful in between. Like it felt like, I often
Mhm.
share, like it felt like going to the spa. Like there were
Yeah.
candles and a huge soaker tub, and the lighting was not like a hospital at all, like very warm, very cozy. Um, yeah, my labor, I noticed that I was laboring during the day. And even that, even the onset of labor for me was just like, oh, here we go. Like zero alarm, zero sort of like cause for concern,
Mm.
just paying attention, listening, like really listening to my body, paying attention. By like
How
3 or
many weeks were
4,
you?
39 and a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, under 40,
Mhm.
under 40.
Okay.
Um, by like 4 in the afternoon, I had said to my husband, I'm like, I think maybe we should call the midwife. Like it feels like things are moving along. And my birth plan for this pregnancy was I was just going to have my husband and my oldest daughter as my birth keepers and the midwives.
Mhm.
So my daughter she's a flight attendant and she was just landing. And
Oh.
so she was able to land and get to the birth center and we were all together at about 6:30 and it was just the most beautiful, easeful. I had like my mantras playing. I was able to be in my body. My husband was supporting me with massage. My daughter was supporting me with massage. Just the three of us kind of like in this birth portal. Like it was just
Mm-hmm.
everything. It was just magic. It was just magic. It was so like this. Like there was nothing else
Yeah.
from the outside coming into that
Yeah.
experience. Even my
Mm-hmm.
midwives, I can't tell you that I even have memory of them being around. Like
Oh, I
they
love
were
that.
there for sure,
That's how
but
it
it
should
was,
be.
yeah, I was really left to be in the
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so I ended up getting into the tub. Things started progressing like pretty quickly. The sensations for me were messages from who now I know is Francesca, but I really felt
Mm.
like it didn't feel like pain. It felt like
Mm.
communication. So I really
Wow.
felt like we were in this experience of she was communicating with me as she was moving through the birth process. And my job was just to surrender and kind of get out of the way, allow
Mm.
myself to open, allow myself to soften, allow myself to like be taken by the like powerful waves, trusting that like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it really felt like no other experience in my life that we were really in communication, and it's been a really big part of my mothering now after going
Mm-hmm.
through this birth experience is so much of what I perceive my job to be as mother is to be with my own stuff as my children bring it to me to experience,
Mm-hmm.
to soften into it and to get out of their way,
Yeah.
to allow
I
them to
like
like
that.
really
Yeah.
be my mirror, my teacher. And in this
Mm-hmm.
really physical, somatic way, that was my experience of labor with Frankie. So we were in the water, which had always been a dream of mine to be
Oh,
in the tub. And I had
yeah.
this idea of having a water birth. And just when it was time to push, I got this really clear message that like, get out. This is not where she wants to come through. And so
Yeah.
I was able to move from the tub to this like just beautiful like California king birthing bed. So my husband was
Nice.
beside me, my daughter was beside me, and she came through with a couple of pushes, like
Wow.
just really easeful and beautiful. And it was everything that I had known
Mm-hmm.
inside that birth could be for me.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
felt so fortunate to be able to have so much trust in myself, so much trust in the birth process, so much having my husband not sort of like it's interesting because I have heard from a sister that when she was entering into her birth portal that she didn't want anyone around her who had
Mm-hmm.
any fear. Like she didn't even
Yeah.
want fear on her periphery. And so I'm really grateful that, my daughter was able to hold space for me and
Mm-hmm.
not bring any of her fears or anxieties or worries into the birth process. My husband was able to do the same. I was blessed with midwives who really just sort of stood back and held the space for
Yeah.
me. So, yeah, it was the most amazing grand finale of
Oh,
birth that
it
I could have
sounds
ever prayed for.
absolutely beautiful. Oh, I love birth. I love witnessing birth. And when you get to see a woman birthing who's truly in her own power and
Mhm.
feeling like she's in control, it's just, it's so different witnessing that versus a birth where a woman has an epidural and is scared and really feels like she needs constant reassurance from the medical team, and like she won't even move her arm without like can I do this, it's just like where when a woman is just completely surrendered to doctors and the medical system, and they really don't believe that they can do it, like without the doctors, they just feel like my baby's never going to come out. Like I need help. And it would really break my heart to see women coming in for their induction, and they come in and most of them just look scared. They're there and they're like, okay, what do I do now? And you're like, well, here, put on this patient gown because now you're a patient, and lie down, and now I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, and we're going to do this, this, and that. And they're just like, okay. And they're just like, it's different. It's just so different. The energy. Like, I've just seen a lot of women that, like, they kind of tap out, even when their baby's coming, they're not, like, really feeling what's going on, because part of it is a lot of time they can't physically feel what's happening. Well, most of the time they can't feel what's happening, but it's so different. And that's why I love these stories, because you got to really experience all the different kinds of birth and really feel this shift. And I think it's important that we respect women wherever they are in their journey, because like you said, like, you had all these experiences, and it took you being, what was it, 41, to really be like, oh, no, I know I can do this. I know my body was built to birth, and birth is inherently safe, and I can do this. And I have my midwife out there, and, if for any reason I need her, which would be very rare, but it can happen, she's going to step in and she's going to help me. But she trusts me, and she trusts that I can do this. And just having your provider believe in you and trust that you are capable of birthing, just like all animals, you can do this. You don't need me to pull out your baby. Your baby will come. It changes everything. And I think telling these stories, bringing awareness to this, is so important, because there are so many women that it's not even in, like, on their mind. They just, go to the hospital. Like, that's what my mom did, that's what my friend did. They just go. They don't even, like, question anything. They're just like, you tell me what to do. I heard Dr. Stu from the Birthing Instinct talking about how birth is one of the most, if not the most important thing that happens to a woman, aside from her wedding, right? And for our weddings, we are so invested. We do all the research. We will pay all the money to have what we want. We want to choose the color of the napkins. We want to choose where that chair is going to go. We want everything to be perfect. We want it to be our way. But with birth, we often just completely outsource it. It's just like, well, they'll take care of it. And it's like, birth is even more important than your wedding. Like, it's such a transformative experience. And we've completely let go of that. We've really outsourced it. Or in, like, some countries where women often have to get a private midwife, and it can be quite expensive, like in Australia, like $8,000. And, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but just comparing it to the wedding aspect, like, women will pay, $100,000 to have this dream wedding. But then they're like, oh no, I'm not going to pay $6,000 for a private midwife. I'll just go into the public system and get an OB, and they can just do whatever they want, where I don't have any control, kind of thing. So I thought it was very interesting, the comparison. I never thought about it that way. And it really, makes me think that, like, women need to just really sit down with this and be aware of what it could be. And like you said, for the twins, you had this plan, and then you had preeclampsia and had to be induced and all that. And it wasn't exactly what you had planned. But just knowing what you can, like, what you're capable of, even if things don't go as planned. And you can push more, you don't have to just take whatever they say. Like, do your research, really know what your options are, really ask, like, wait, what is this? What are the risks to this? Do I want this? Like, you can say no, you can ask questions. And I think women really need to start doing more of that.
Yeah, one big part, and I'm out of my birthing season, but it's since I've had my last birth, I have opened my awareness and in my community to ideas of free birthing, where women are stepping outside of the system
Mm-hmm.
entirely, and they
Yeah.
go from zero interventions, like not a blood test, not pee on a strip, not anything, and somehow life comes through and they're able
Mm-hmm.
to birth. And so taking that idea and magnifying it into my own life on the ways in which I have surrendered my sovereignty and my power around my own life, my own body, my parenting, that the choices that I make on interventions into the way that I am as being, and then looking at why. Like for me, a big part of my birthing story has been inward, into looking into the
Yeah.
ways in which, why do I feel afraid of this? What story is here inside of me that has me afraid that, that something's going to go wrong? Where is this
Mm-hmm.
held deeper in my body? Like the birth is just the magnifier. The process of birth, for me, I have experienced my pregnancies and my birth stories to be great amplifiers of what's really alive for me and what's asking to be looked at, what's asking to be held, what's asking to be felt, what's asking to be integrated and maybe even
Mm-hmm.
released, so that you can make space for something else. Make space literally for this new life, but also make space for this different version of yourself that's now going to be a different woman than you were before you entered the birth portal. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
fear and the sensation of fear and the memory of fear and the experience of fear has been a big teacher for me on how I've navigated my life, where
Mm-hmm.
like sort of the arrows are pointing to explore deeper. And what greater way than birth? Because if there's ever
Yeah.
anything that you hear about birth, is that it's so painful, you should be
Yeah.
afraid, it's
Yeah.
going to be terrible. And there are women who experience ecstatic births, orgasmic
Yeah.
births even, and it's
Mm-hmm.
possible. Not only is it possible, it's likely, if we can get out of our head and really be in our bodies. But
Yeah.
that's a journey, and it's not just a birth journey, it's a lifelong journey.
It really is. And it really spills over into other areas of your life when you start to really tune in and trust your body and just, really believe that, like, this is what I was built for, it's what I was born to do. And when you trust that and you sit with that, it starts to spill into all the other areas. And once you start to really dive deep into this world of birth and understanding what we're capable of and truly believing that birth is safe and
Mhm.
that, 99% of the time it's going to be fine, you can't unsee that. It's very hard. Like, you can't unsee it. You just, once you start reading about it and watching and even reading like the evidence-based things and then seeing how it's done in the hospital, and it's just like that doesn't sit well with me. And it's hard because, like, you were talking about free birthing, and I've listened to probably 200 episodes of the Free Birth Society podcast, and part of me loves it. I think it's amazing. And what I find even more fascinating is that most, if not all, of these women don't have any medical background, which in part I think helps, because, like, for me, for example, when my waters ruptured, there was tons of meconium, like really thick meconium, and in the hospital that would have been woo big deal. And I was just like, oh, of course this is going to happen to test me. And I'm like, it's okay, this is a variation of normal. I can feel my baby, I feel good, I know my baby's okay. And I feel like when you don't know anything about the way it's done in the hospital, it's just easier to trust yourself and trust the process. But I think ultimately, a lot of women are choosing to free birth because they want to be in charge. They want to have this beautiful sovereign birth, and they don't want people telling them this is what you have to do, doing all these different interventions. But they would like a skilled midwife who, like you had, just there in the back, not bothering you. You don't even remember her. But if in the really rare chance that something did happen, there was a shoulder dystocia, which, is going to be less common if you don't have an epidural and you're moving around and you're able to shift your body, you know. But if there's a real postpartum hemorrhage, anything, having that skilled provider that only steps in that very rare case where something actually happens and you need them, I think would be very reassuring to a lot of moms and dads. I know a lot of dads worry about that. They don't want to just have their partner free birthing, and what if something happens? They're the ones that feel responsible a lot of the time because you're kind of out of it when you're in labor. So I think a lot of women are just choosing free birth because they don't have the option of having a real, I guess, like a traditional midwife that is letting you just do what you want to do. So there are like a lot of birth keepers now coming up that, will attend to hold space for you, but they don't actually have any medical training. And I love that there is this support and these women that are loving birth and wanting to come and support other women. But I do also have a little bit of issue with that because I've been hearing a lot of different things of, where these women are charging a lot of money, upwards for $6,000 to attend, and they don't have any medical training, so they can't actually do anything in an emergency. But what bothers me the most is most of these birth keepers, if for any reason you decide to transfer to a hospital, whether it's a true emergency or whether you just decide, I can't do this anymore, I want an epidural, most of them they will not go with you to the hospital because they don't support the hospital at all. And I think there's a place and time for everything. And like, I don't think majority of people need to birth in a hospital because they're not sick. Birth is not a disease, it's a natural thing. But there are very few instances where you truly do need the hospital, or because you choose that you want an epidural. And I think if you have all of the information, there's fentanyl in here. This is what can happen to your baby's heart. This is the cascade of interventions that can happen. If you have all that information, but you still choose to do that, then you have to be respected. And, so I think like a lot of people outside of the system, they like to criticize everything about the medical system or about how midwives will abandon you if you decline a test to this and that. But at the same time, you'll have birth keepers that will abandon you if you decide, I need to go to the hospital now. And then you're showing up there outside of the system, which, is already very stressful for you. They will treat you as like, oh my God, this person, how are they still alive? They haven't done a test, so, and you don't have someone there advocating for you. Like a doula will come to the hospital and, they will be advocating for you and helping you navigate all of that. So it's not a black and white. There's lots of gray areas in this whole thing. And I can go on talking about that for a long time, but just something that I've started to notice the more I've been talking to people about it. So it really shows that there is this desire for women to really, take charge, take back their power and have these beautiful sovereign births. But they would like a wise woman and often a trained woman that just, takes a step back. Yeah. What do you think about all that?
So that really makes me feel two things: that women, no matter how you choose to birth, we need to be supported and nourished, and like by stuff like this, to be honest, it's like when we're sharing our birth stories, when we're coming together to like collectively support a woman when she's in pregnancy and preparing for her birth, and being like a strong network of women, mothers and elders, like this idea of like birth keepers for profit. Like, I get it. Everyone has their calling,
Mm-hmm.
and you could be
Mm-hmm.
incredibly passionate about birth and really want to support birth outside the medical system. I get it 100%. Um, Also, if we were 100 years ago, this would be the older aunties in the community
Mm-hmm.
who would be
Yeah.
supporting your birth. So, is there an opportunity for that type of ideology to still, because you could still maybe argue that the birth keeping society, if they're charging $6,000 for a birth, they're a part of another kind of system as well. It isn't really
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
necessarily about
Mm-hmm.
empowering and supporting organic, spontaneous, physiological birth.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there a way of having elderhood, older women, aunties and grandmothers who have the heart space and the lived experience to hold space for birth? Like, could we find the elder birth keepers that aren't
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
necessarily working from the same sort of structure of financial. And I know that's
Mm-hmm.
probably like a fantasy land in the world that we live in today, but I think everything is possible. Like, if
Yeah,
there's this
totally. Yeah.
movement of women reclaiming birth as
Mm-hmm.
a sovereign physiological event, also with the disclaimer that, death is also a physiological event and it's a part of birth.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that you can't kind of have your cake and eat it too, to say, I'm going to have sovereign birth
Mm-hmm.
and jump into the medical system if big programs of fear come. Looking at it all from, a bigger picture, and also
Mm-hmm.
empowering women that whatever their path is a perfect path to motherhood. Like, this idea of
Yeah.
control. Um, for me, my path in birth has been about surrendering the idea of control.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, I still had ideas of how I wanted it to go with the twins.
Mm-hmm.
And what a beautiful, like, intersection of what my ideas were and how it actually ended up. And then my experience with my last birth was really getting out of the way and surrendering to the
Yeah.
process. So much so
Yeah.
that I had this vision of having a water birth. And I was able to receive the message that she was like, no, you need to get out of the tub
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Yeah.
And so, for me, my experience of becoming more embodied in my birth is less about ideas of control and more about
Yeah.
surrendering to the process, and,
Yeah.
and whatever the outcomes may be. Because
Yeah.
the reality is, the physiological reality is that birth doesn't always end up with life. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a part of, what it is to
Yeah.
be human, what it is to give birth. So, and then
Mm-hmm.
sitting with that actual fact,
Yeah.
and what
Yeah.
does that bring up in your body, and where do you start to feel contraction,
Mm-hmm.
and where does the fear programming start coming? But yeah, I feel like it's beautiful to see all different expressions of birth, because when I think
Mm-hmm.
back of what was possible when I birthed my first baby 34 years ago, it wasn't even in my awareness that
Yeah.
birth outside of the system, with all of the interventions that they felt I needed, and me just saying, oh, yes, please, I'm terrified. Help me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any variation of that is all
Yeah.
perfect. It's all perfect. And there's such deep medicine in being able for us as women to come together and share where we felt disappointed, where we were elated, where, we really felt afraid, what was really difficult for us, what was amazing, what would we have liked to have seen different. Like, I think the sharing of the experience of birth allows for the acceptance of that birth. I think that there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of um, judgment sometimes, depending on where you are on the birth spectrum, of other people's births and other people's
Mm-hmm.
choices. And I would love to see women just celebrating and supporting and listening and honoring each of our processes.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. It's really well said. I think it's just so important to just support women wherever they are. Just like you said, sometimes it's not even in their awareness, and this is where they are right now, and this is all they know based on what they've been told by their moms and aunts or what they've seen in movies. And it's really important to just, with love and gentleness, just sending out this message and just showing women what it can be and reminding them of the power that's within them, and that if they choose to do so, they can really take, well, like I said, not control over the birth, because like you said, you really have to surrender, and that is such a strong message, because you can't control birth. Birth is, it's going to be what it's going to be. You can plan everything. Like I planned every detail of my birth, and it did not go as planned. I ended up in a C-section, and that was very devastating to me, and still have issues with that. But all in all, surrendering and just being aware of what can happen, what your choices are, and being okay with it. And like you said, death is part of it. And a lot of people think, oh, if you're in the hospital, there is no death. That's not true. People go to the hospital to die. And I've seen plenty of times where people come, like people I know personally, on social media or while I was at work, that came to have a baby, and their baby didn't have a heartbeat. And had they stayed at home for a home birth and the same outcome happened, a lot of people would have said, oh, if only they had gone to the hospital. If only their baby would still be alive. No, a lot of the time, no, it wouldn't. Sometimes death just happens, and it's devastating and it's heartbreaking, and we don't understand why, but it happens. The hospital cannot save us from that. Like, death is part of life. You don't have life without death. And when we accept that, it does make it easier as well to trust ourselves and to trust the natural process of birth, and to, just trust the whole thing and just sit with it and feel okay with it. And once we do, and it's very hard, it can be absolutely beautiful. And I'm so glad to hear that with all of your experiences and births, that you were able to ultimately have that beautiful dream birth. And I can just picture it, and I love the vision I have, and I'm so happy you got to experience that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Before I let you go, is there any piece of advice that you would like to pass on to mamas listening or future moms?
So, let me feel into this. I think the piece of advice that I would share from my lived experience is that we are the creators of life. We are the vessels and the creators of life. And no matter how your child has come earthside, you are a giver and a creator of life. Period. Whether it was C-section, whether you had all the interventions, whether you had free birth in the forest, we have held life in our bodies and brought life onto the earth. And isn't that the celebration of being mother? No matter the path of the birth story, you are a life-giving woman. And that, I think, is something to be reminded of when we are settling up sometimes our ideas of what we wanted our birth to be and what it actually is. Considering birth, considering the fear that might live in our bodies around birth, is to keep that in sort of the frame of how you experience pregnancy, birth, and delivery and motherhood. As can it be a celebration that we are the creators and the maintainers and bringers of life, no matter what it looks like.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and your wisdom. I really appreciate you taking the time today. It was a lovely chat.
Yeah, thank you. This is really beautiful.
I hope you have a lovely day
Yes,
and hope homeschooling goes well
yes,
today.
it will.
Yes.
For sure. For sure.
I love that. I love that you're homeschooling. I want to learn more about it because I think I want to homeschool too. Still getting my husband on board, but
That'll be your
it just
next
feels
podcast.
aligned. That would
Yeah.
be the next
A few
one.
years. We'll give you a
I
few
have
years.
lots to learn. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Jen.
Have a good
Take
day.
care. Thank you so much for tuning in to Birth Unboxed. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and want to hear more, please consider subscribing to the podcast so you never miss an episode and leaving a review. I'd love to hear your thoughts or even your own birth stories, so feel free to connect with me via Instagram at thebirthunboxed.podcast or through my website linked in the show notes. Until next time, friends.